Okay, so I'll say again, I'm Tom Martino with SNAP Watershed Implementation Grants, and thanks everybody for being here. I think we'll do an overview of the grants program. I think that'll take half hour, 45 minutes, and then we'll make ourselves available for questions. So, we should have time to get to everybody's questions, and this entire session will take maybe an hour or so. Let me first introduce also Margarita Pryor. Can you wave, Margarita, or come on camera? Margarita is our EPA program officer, so she and I work very closely together on managing this program. Some of you are old hands to SNEP Watershed Implementation Grants, fondly known as SWIG, and some of you are I can see, are new to our program. So this presentation will be, at kind of a comprehensive overview. And forgive me, those of you who are familiar with the program. We do have a few, changes this year as usual, but nothing too significant. If you've applied to SNEP Watershed Implementation Grants in the past, you won't find it to be significantly different than past years, recent years anyway. I'm going to share my screen, and I have a little presentation for you. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So SNEP Watershed Implementation Grants is managed as a partnership between Restore America's Estuaries, which is a national nonprofit, and EPA Region 1. The funding is entirely federal, with the exception of the non-federal match that I'll mention. But our actual grants are federal, and but Restore America's Estuaries has a cooperative agreement with EPA and has had since 2018 to manage this program. We're a national network of nonprofit coastal conservation organizations, and the one that you all are undoubtedly familiar with is Save the Bay in Providence, Rhode Island. Now, SNAP is kind of the overarching program, the Southeast New England program. It was created in 2014 by Congress. It's basically a funding program as opposed to an authorized program like the National Estuary programs are, or whatever. And EPA manages it out of Region 1, and it has funding components, including ours. It has technical assistance components, and it has planning, and science components. There is a strategic plan online that I'd encourage you to take a look at. You can link to it off of our website, which is snepgrants.org. And that's EPA's, the SNEP program's vision for the future of Southeast New England coastal environment. And the three pillars of that are clean water, healthy ecosystems, and sustainable communities. So everything that we fund supports one of those, one or preferably more of those pillars. And as you can see, they're so broad that they really cover the majority of, certainly on the ground and in the water, restoration work that is done in Southeast New England. This is our funding region. It's defined on a watershed basis, so it doesn't coincide with state lines all that well. For all practical purposes, our funding region includes all of the state of Rhode Island. Now, in Massachusetts, it's defined on a watershed basis, so it's a little different. You can see the Narragansett Bay watershed covers, much of southeastern Massachusetts. So that's why our funding region goes up to Worcester, Massachusetts, and includes like Brockton, Mass, and Taunton, Mass, which is part of the Taunton watershed, which is a sub-watershed in Narragansett Bay. We also include the Buzzards Bay watershed, So for that reason, New Bedford is covered. I should have said under Narragansett Bay, Fall River is also covered. And then the south facing part of Cape Cod is covered out to Pleasant Bay, which is, Chatham basically. So, it's the south facing watersheds of Cape Cod. As you can see, that includes, or it also includes, I should say, the Elizabethan Islands out to Cunninghunk, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, Block Island, and of course the islands of Narragansett Bay. So the idea of this geography is that we kind of fill in the gap between the Long Island Sound program and the Gulf of Maine program, and any lands or waters, any watershed areas that drain to coastal waters between the Gulf of Maine and Long Island Sound, or the waters themselves, are within our funding area. If you have any questions, if you have a project that is like right on the border and you're not sure if it's in or out, you can go to our website, snepgrants.org. From there, you can link to EPA has an interactive GIS map of the funding region. You could zoom right in to a particular spot and see whether it's within or without our funding boundaries. We also recognize that sometimes, a project may be a municipal project, and the funding line goes right through the middle of the municipality, something like that. You know, as long as the project predominantly benefits the SNEP region, we can work with projects that are cross boundary to a certain extent. Yeah, again, this is we've had a cooperative agreement with EPA since 2018. Ray has, and in that time, I think we've done 6 grant rounds so far. This will be the 7th. We've done in that time more than 80 grants. Most of these are partnership projects, so there's been, I haven't actually counted, but easily 200 organizations have participated in these grants and either received funding or partnered in other ways. Since 2018, we've awarded about $18 million, and most of our grants are, well, let me say, our maximum grant is $500,000. Most of our grants are in like the 100 to 400,000, or maybe 75,000 to $400,000 range. We will fund smaller grants under kind of for specific purposes. Those are outlined in the RFP. I may touch on them a little later. We don't do that many smaller grants though. And in terms of the largest grants, the $500,000 grants, we do quite a few of those, but in order to justify a $500,000 grant, we have to show a pretty significant impact. I see Margarita. Margarita, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that we also include within our boundaries the two national estuary programs. So Narragansett Bay, and that's part of the reason we go all the way up to Worcester, because the Blackstone is a major tributary to the bay. And then also the Buzzards Bay NEP, which goes all the way up as well towards the east. And so those programs are good partners. They've worked a lot with the SWIGs. They also get their own funding through SNEP. So the $18 million in awards that Tom is talking about is a fraction of the amount that the SNEP has put out over the years. But the two big partners there in terms of planning and doing sub-awards and sub-RFPs, if you will, are the two NEPs. So it's just good to keep them in mind. We don't have a similar partner on the Cape, but we work a lot with the Cape Cod Commission. So that organization has received a lot of grants as well. So I just wanted to clarify that we've done a lot more than 18 million, but the SWIGs are the ones that are the most inclusive of areas. So that's a very important point.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Margarita. And our program, um, you know, um, is there's a synergy with, we hope, with other SNEP funding, and that includes the pilot watershed program that you may have heard of, the SNEP pilot watershed grants. There have been direct SNEP grants. Uh, there's also the SNEP network that provides technical assistance that I'll talk about in a few minutes. But yeah, as Margarita said, we're just one of several funding programs within SNEP. Ours, though, is probably, it's the one that is kind of most similar year to year. So it's good in that way, in that you can anticipate our funding is, comes, our RFPs come out every February. We award roughly the same amount every year, and it provides a certain amount of, I think, continuity that's helpful to people doing projects, that they know that the funding will be around next year, whether they need it for a different project or a different phase of a project. Go to the next slide here if I can figure out how to do that. Yeah, so we have an RFP open now, as you all undoubtedly know, through April 18th. It closes. The first step in the application process is a letter of intent, which is very streamlined online application. We'll evaluate the letters of intent, and from those we'll select the applications that for which we're requesting full proposals. And by the time we're notifying people of awards, it's typically July or August, and then we announce the grants in uh, September typically. Um, as with any grant program, I strongly encourage you to read the RFP carefully. There's a bunch of other resources on our website, so just go to snepgrants.org. You can jump from there to SWIG25, and everything that you need to know about the program is there. You can also look at what we funded in the past, and that'll give you a good idea of what our kind of overall focus is. Having said that, the fact that we haven't funded a particular kind of project in the past doesn't mean we won't fund it in the future, because we do like innovative projects, and we like to expand the scope of the program. So these are kind of our major funding themes for 2025. Not meant to be exclusive of anything, but it gives you an idea of what we're looking at. In here in Southeast New England, small cities, Providence, Fall River, New Bedford, obviously are really important, and Newport, and have opportunities for urban restoration, whether it's green streets or park enhancement, or river restoration within those communities, shoreline restoration. We're also interested in some of the more rural landscapes. We funded a lot of work, for example, in the Big River Management Area, for those of you who know that, in Rhode Island, which is way out in West Greenwich, out on the frontier. And of course, up in the Taunton watershed, and up towards Worcester, there's a lot of relatively undeveloped areas that with lots of restoration opportunities, conservation restoration, I should say. A lot of our work focuses on water quality, and it includes both innovative solutions and kind of time-tested approaches, both at the planning and the implementation level. We're very interested in adaptation, whether that's coastal adaptation or other ways in adapting to some of the changing conditions that we're seeing these days with climate and precipitation and so forth. We really like partnerships, and we really encourage that most, if not all, of the grants that are submitted are partnership in one way or another. And those take all different forms, whether it's a municipality working with a nonprofit, or a couple of nonprofits working together, or a nonprofit that brings in a educational institution or vice versa. We see all different permutations of that. Um, and we are all about building capacity, and part of that is fostering regional learning. So we really hope that whatever you're doing with a SNEP grant, that you'll um, share the results of that project, both with practitioners and with the public, and hopefully, elevate the practice of ecological restoration, water quality restoration throughout the region as a result of your experience. Some of the more specific things that we've funded are, you know, all different scales of restoration, whether that's a neighborhood watershed, a watershed that's the size of a neighborhood, up to one of the larger sub watersheds of Narragansett Bay, like the Wood Pawcatuck watershed in the western part of Rhode Island. We funded quite a few green streets and neighborhoods projects, places like Pawtucket and New Bedford. Um, Many of our projects have a community engagement component and a job training component, many times often for young people who are maybe doing green landscaping, that kind of thing, or involved in other ways. We fund a lot of stormwater projects. Those include demonstration projects. They include more sort of comprehensive installations. Um, they include training, both for municipalities and again, youth and people like that. We fund a lot of habitat restoration, everything from cranberry bog to dam removals to salt marsh restorations, at all different scales. We funded one oyster restoration project in Rhode Island. Um, Again, coastal adaptation, things like living shorelines. We funded a number of sort of hybrid approaches where there may be um, like oyster castles or constructed reefs combined with living shoreline approaches to attenuate shoreline energy and help restore eroding shorelines. Again, we funded a number of innovative technologies and pilot projects, including permeable reactive barriers and bioreactor technology, innovative approaches to septic systems. We don't fund private septic systems, but we will fund, individual private septic systems, but we will fund approaches to septic management. So, for example, a town up in uh, kind of a rural mill town up in uh, northern Rhode Island, Chepachet, the village of Chepachet, Rhode Island. We funded a septic management plan and approach aimed at bringing commercial properties um, into a more structured uh, approach to septic systems and shared septic systems, and a way of allowing uh, these commercial properties in particular to redevelop in this village, and be able to improve their septic management while um, by both sharing resources and innovative approaches to septic management in Chepachet. We fund watershed and regional plans, particularly around stormwater management and that kind of thing, or flooding. Um, Also, a lot of our projects may build on existing plans. We have funded a few projects around marine pollution and solid waste. That's not kind of our main focus, but where there's a strong ecosystem and community component, we'll fund those kinds of projects, particularly if they're having trouble, if they're the kind of projects that can't easily be funded through some of the existing sources for those kinds of projects. And I mentioned we will do some smaller grants, and often those are for conferences or other technology transfer kind of things. So if you wanted to do a regional conference on salt marsh management or something, you could come to us for that, and we would consider a smaller grant um, to do that. Eligible organizations are the ones that are typical for federal funding. Uh, Basically, we can fund anybody except for private individuals, private companies, or federal agencies. So nonprofits, academic organizations, Native American tribes, regional planning organizations, universities, other schools, um, and we we often, again, because we often fund partnerships, there may often be they may be private individuals or private company or something like that that is partnered on a grant, but they can't be the primary recipient because you know they're not eligible recipients of the grant itself, but they can come in as partners. Similarly, federal agencies often come in as partners, and we often see USGS, for example, as a partner on our projects where they're doing a component of the work, um, but not being funded, and their contribution doesn't count as match. Here's the timeline for the program. Um, we're in obviously in the application period right now, the letter of intent application period. I'll mention there's another funding workshop tomorrow that the SNEP network is hosting, and that covers not just this program, but a number of um, both state and federal funding programs specifically for Rhode Island. They did another one for Massachusetts yesterday, which will be recorded. So if you go to the SNEP network website, and I'll talk about that in a minute, you can get those resources. Um, Again, our LOI closes on April 18th. By mid-May, we'll let you know whether or not we're requesting a full proposal, which will be due if requested on July 11th. Typically, we notify the grantees of awards in August, and then September, October. As soon as we have a grant agreement that's signed, you can begin work, and then we announce the grants in the fall. Typically, we do events with the congressional delegations, both in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. These grants are typically 2 years, just a little bit over 2 years. So December 31st, 2027 will be the end date for the grants that we award this year. The what we're after, again, as I mentioned, are applications or projects, I should say, that support the vision, goals, and priorities of the SNEP strategic plan. We're not just looking for, planning projects that, that don't necessarily have, or I should say, plans and studies that don't have a clear idea of how they're going to affect positive change in the ecosystem. We're looking for, we'll fund planning projects, we'll fund studies, but they've got to have a path toward, real change in the environment. Most of our projects have a connection to water quality, or just about all of them, but we look for holistic approaches so that projects that have more than just a narrow benefit are the ones that do best in our process. Projects that, for example, you know, improve communities while improving the environment. That engage communities that, like I said, have a communications component. Or projects. Many of our projects may address flooding and water quality, or may address habitat and water quality, that kind of thing. Again, We're really interested in supporting both local and regional partnerships. We're interested in building capacity, and that can take a wide variety of um, forms. Again, whether it's through information, whether it's through um, you know, developing sustainable partnerships, whether it's through bringing expertise into a community that may not have been there before. I think I've covered most of the rest of these bullets, but I will say that the proposals that do best in our process are those that are grounded in the needs of the community, and not kind of imposed from outside, or projected onto communities, but ones that are more grassroots and organic in terms of having real local support, and um, um, and again an understanding of how they're going to be implemented. We understand that when you submit a proposal, um, you may not always know how a plan will be implemented or how a project will ultimately get funded and come to fruition. For example, if you may be submitting on a design phase of a project that the construction is not funded, that kind of thing. So we understand that projects may take shape in different ways, and we allow for that, but you should have an idea of how the work that you're doing is ultimately going to be implemented, how it uh, will ultimately affect change in the environment. Um, I think I covered some of these bullets already. I mean, again, many times the proposals that come in are building on an existing planning framework. There may be a watershed plan, there may be a municipal vulnerability plan. Um, but we also understand that sometimes the existing plans are not um, adequate for whatever reason. You may be proposing to do something, beyond an existing plan. What we don't like to see is proposals that come in and are kind of unaware of planning work that's been done. So, like, there'll be times that um, we've gotten proposals, for example, for um, coastal inundation studies that kind of ignore the fact that Rhode Island has, a very extensive, coastal modeling and storm tools, right? So if you come in with a proposal and say, we're going to do something that Storm Tools hasn't done, that's another thing. But if you come in with a proposal that just kind of ignores the existence of Storm Tools, then we're going to say, well, what about Storm Tools? So that's just one example. Um, and I think I've covered most of these things. I think the important thing is that your proposal is building on some impetus or need in the community, and that it brings in the partners that are there. Occasionally we'll get a proposal um, that is a proposal where clearly the municipality should be involved, or clearly there's a nonprofit that should be involved that's not involved. Um, and of course, and the question we ask, is why is the municipality not involved? And so, think about the partners on your project, and bring them in if you can. And then, as I mentioned, our program calls for non-federal match. That's 33% of the award amount. Hey, Jim Tiernan, can you turn off your camera? Whatever you're doing over there is like super distracting. Okay, yeah, just turn it off, please. Thank you. These are the proposals that don't necessarily do well under our process are, like I said, those that haven't thought through how they might be implemented. We get these proposals for plans and studies that, are frankly kind of, academic, more academically oriented. They may be really great academic studies, but that's not what we're in business of funding. Um, and again, I mean, the second bullet is really kind of similar to the first one. Yeah, sometimes people, we have a little in our full proposal, we have a little exercise that we ask applicants to do, which is it's kind of a logic model. It's very simple, flow chart that shows, if you're doing this work, if you're a very simple example would be if you're reconnecting a salt marsh to tidal water, like what do you think is going to happen as a result of that? Is it going to restore habitat? Is it going to restore fisheries access? Is it going to increase resilience in relative to sea level rise? We occasionally get proposals that where there's a work that's being proposed without a really clear idea of what is the problem that's being addressed and how is this work going to address it. So think about the problem and think about how your proposal is ultimately going to address that problem. And I think our application is set up to encourage you to do that, but still we do get proposals once in a while that are kind of disconnected from you know the results, or not well enough connected to the results. And you know, hey Jim, can you turn off your camera, please? Just turn off your camera, please. Okay. Um, the other one we'll get a lot of times is we'll get like two proposals in the same geographic area to do like the same thing practically. And if those proposals make it to the second stage of a full proposal, we'll ask, we'll let the proponents know that they're basically competing, um, and suggest that they get it together. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes organizations, for whatever reason, don't want to work together. But if we're getting two proposals to do virtually the same thing in the same place, I can guarantee you we're not going to fund both of them, and we may not fund either one because it raises the question of why aren't these organizations working together. Um, just a few kind of logistical things about our program. Again, I everything you need to know is really in the RFP and in the other online resources that we provide on our SWIG25 page. The grants are reimbursable, meaning basically you go out, you incur the expenses, and we reimburse them. But we can do that very quickly. The match is 33% non-federal, but we'll take just about anything as match. So it can be your staff time, it can be other people's staff time, like there's a municipality that's supporting the project, that's very common. Um, it can be other grants or cash. Um, again, our grants are 2-year performance period, a little bit more. We require semi-annual progress reports. Most of our grants require quality assurance performance plans. This is an EPA requirement for any project that either generates or utilizes environmental data. So, unless it's like a conference or a really outreach oriented project, or maybe a very simple landscaping project, something like that, pretty much everything else that we fund requires a quality assurance performance plan. And it's something we have to do. It's something that any good consulting firm can do for you if you don't have the capacity to do it yourself. And I really encourage people to shop it out if if they have any doubts about their own ability to write it. And, you know, it's something we do, get it out of the way. You can pay for it with the grant. You can budget it into the grant. And if you have questions about that, contact me offline because, you know, we have a lot of experience in these things. We can help you with that. Since it's federal funding, you know, federal requirements apply. And those are things like, you know, if it's over $250,000 purchase, you know, like a construction contract, then, you know, it requires open competition for that contract. And again, we have many of those resources on our website, and we can always help you with those. And you know, since we we have this funding program every year, we give, you know, we make these grants every year. Um, you know, if you apply to us and we don't fund you this year, I always encourage people to um, reapply next year, you know, if you haven't found another source of funding. And you know, I'm always willing to have debriefing meetings with people if they're not funded by our program. And it's been you know, many times organizations have applied, not received a grant, gone back, worked on the project, and received a grant from us in the second year. Again, I mentioned snepgrants.org, which is our website. You can link to SWIG25 from there and find pretty much everything you need. And I'm always available. My email should be right on the website. Now, I mentioned the SNEP network. If we're kind of the principal funding arm of SNEP, then the SNEP network is the principal technical assistance arm. And you can go to their website, which is right here, snepnetwork.org, and see everything they do. They provide quite a lot of technical assistance for organizations that are working on the kind of projects that we fund. Again, you know, a lot of water quality, habitat, stormwater financing is one of their areas of expertise. I should have mentioned the SNEP network is managed by the New England Environmental Finance Center out of the University of Maine. So they have a lot of expertise in financing, but also, you know, they have some engineering firms on call and that kind of thing. If, you know, in many cases, organizations have gone to the SNEP network to develop a project and then come to us for funding the implementation of it. And conversely, there's also been many instances where we've provided a grant to an organization that then brings in the SNEP network to help them with like training and stuff like that, if there are training components or uh, informational components in particular. So, or you know, capacity building type stuff, you know, working with communities and that kind of thing. So I definitely encourage you to check out their website and take advantage of their resources if you can. And that's it for my presentation. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I'll just hold this up for just a minute. You know, again, snepgrants.org. Here's my email, and I, you know, encourage you to check out EPA's SNEP strategic plan or link from our website to learn more about the overall SNEP program. And so I'm going to stop the sharing here, and hopefully I'll be able to see people's. Let me get my. See if I can see all the participants here. And feel free to raise your hand. It looks like we have something in the chat. You can also put something in the chat. And when is the earliest date for qualifying match for this round? That's an excellent question. So we allow for pre-award costs and pre-award match up to 60 days prior to the execution of the grant agreement. So I call that like the funding period of the grant, because there's like a performance period that starts with the grant agreement, but the funding period can predate the performance period by up to 60 days. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, um, you sign your grant agreement on October 1st, then August 1st, right? August, September would be, roughly the beginning of the funding period. Um, the one with match, that's pretty straightforward. With actual reimbursable costs, grant funding, the one thing to be aware of is, obviously, we're not obligated to those pre-award costs until the grant agreement is signed. So if you were to incur, say, grant costs in September, uh, for a grant agreement that's being signed in October, um, it presupposes that that grant agreement will be approved, and you also have to build those pre-award costs into your budget, and we approve them when we approve the budget and sign the grant agreement, if that makes sense. I can, if I know it's a little complicated, you can always contact me, and I can explain it more easily, over the phone. I see Wenley has a question.
Hi, Tom.
Hey, Wen.
How are you?
Great. How you doing?
Good.
Looks like
Thank
we're in a salt march.
I am.
Did you see that you were on my first
Oh
slide
yeah, that was at the
presentation?
Allens.
Yeah, yeah.
This was all flooded 2 weeks ago, so it's got rid of a lot of mosquito breeding habitat. And guess
Where
what?
are you now?
We're at Galilee, and we just saw signs of blackgrass and salicornia coming up. So spring is in the
Awesome.
march.
Cool.
So you talked about habitat and water quality benefit projects that could have a nexus between habitat restoration and water quality, habitat restoration, and flooding. I'm assuming aquatic connectivity projects like culvert upgrades are eligible activities if they have a habitat component or a water quality component.
Yep. And I will say, we have definitely funded culvert upgrades and replacements and that kind of thing. The ones that don't do very well in our process are ones that kind of are basically sort of road projects that haven't really considered the ecological aspects very well. They may be addressing some flooding, but not really looking at connectivity and water quality or any other benefits. But if you can make that connection, then definitely culvert projects are qualify, and we have funded them. I would try to look at them in kind of a watershed context.
Yep. And we're working with some municipalities and a land trust on one's on a cold water stream with trout habitat, and one's a marsh migration corridor. It's a head of tide culvert, or two culverts. So I think they have different habitat benefits. And the municipality has a real compelling flood benefit, but it's also on a cold water stream, which is kind of unique in this watershed. So, okay, that's great news. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, no problem.
You should also point out that SNEP is, the SWIG has also helped contribute to dam removals, not just culvert. So.
Yes, we've funded several, most recently, completed. One of the projects that Wenley worked on is the Kickamuit dam removal up in Warren, Rhode Island. Actually, two dams up in Warren, Rhode Island. And I really encourage anybody who hasn't seen that site to go look at those dam removals, because that's a great project, restoring estuarine habitat at the head of tide. And right now we're funding War Memorial Park in West Bridgewater, where the town is removing a dam for fish passage. And we're funding design study on Pontiac Dam in Warwick, Rhode Island, which it's I wouldn't call it a dam removal yet, but it's an investigation of options there. And then two small dam removals up in the Big River Management Area on cold water streams, and a design study at on a DEM property down in Arcadia Management Area. So quite a few.
And also the Childs River, which was a massive project, but really successful.
Childs River, I forgot about that one. Yeah, which was both a cranberry bog restoration and a dam removal.
Right.
Let me tackle some of the questions in the chat, and then we can take some more hands if people like, or you can keep adding questions in the chat, whatever you like. Typical length of a SWIG grant is 2 years, a little bit more. So like I said, if we sign your grant agreement, October 1 is not uncommon this year. It'll be at the end of 2027 is the time you have to do the work. Will SWIG only fund a specific project phase, or will it fund multiple project phases? Excellent question. Unlike some other programs will fund multiple project phases. You know, the one thing I would say is, with complex projects, the further out you go, the more uncertainty there is. So, you know, dam removals are a good example. We would rarely, with the exception of a very small dam removal, we would rarely fund design, permitting, and construction on a dam removal, because by the time you get through design and permitting, you know, you can't even really assign the construction costs and the very well until you're through design, and the lifespan of those projects tend to be more than 2 years. So you know, I would just say make it be kind of a manageable chunk that you can get done in 2 years, but if it incorporates multiple project phases, that's fine. How could we get on a list that is willing to work with the communities, however, will not accept the responsibility for grants? I was told that we cannot apply because NGO that have done climate-related projects with grants are being called to repay them. Well, I mean, I can't speak to other programs. I mean, but what I would say that if you're looking for somebody who will work with communities, I would definitely reach out to the SNEP network, and that's what they do. And they're not recalling any grants right now, so that's my suggestion. Margarita, do you have any other suggestions on that one?
I'm not sure that I really understood the question. Are they asking whether grants have been recalled, or whether, I wasn't quite sure I understood the question. Whoever asked it, could you
That was Jim
repeat it?
McFarland. Do you want to get on the call, Jim? And if you want to get on the call and clarify, we can try to address that a little better.
I suppose you could stick with the part specifically of a list, or how to connect with communities that want some pro bono support from an NGO.
Oh, you want to connect with the communities.
Yeah, rather than write the grant or deal with it. If they're doing a grant, then you're definitely willing to be a part of discussions or ideas or sharing thoughts, but you know, can't handle the, you know, just can't be put in that spot right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the SNEP network would probably be the way to go.
And also, you know, keep your eyes open. I don't know if you have a specific place in mind that you want to work with or that you have familiarity with, but just keep your ears open for if they're considering doing a project, and, you know, volunteer to be part of that. I can understand where a private individual doesn't want to be responsible for managing one of these federal grants, because we can be a real pain in the neck with some of our requirements. But if you could be part of another group, that would be the way to go. So I second Tom's suggestion to go to the network, but also need to do a little bit of due diligence yourself about what's going on in places that you have an interest.
Thanks, Margarita. And Wenley has a great comment here, which is that if you want to see the Kickamua Dam removal site, join us for a wetlands planting project along the restored estuary this May. And Wenley, do you mind if I put your email in the contact, or is there a better way to put people in touch with that?
Yeah, folks on this call, feel free to reach out if you're interested in learning about the project. Also, for any future restoration activities that we do, we announce them via our volunteer portal. So you could always sign up, Save Bay. I think it's volunteer@savebay.org. But
I'll just put that in.
Yeah, but also feel free to put my email address if someone's from this group is looking at dam removals and want to learn how we did it and the, you know, steps. and get some guidance, I'm happy. You can put my email, wferguson@savebay.org.
Okay. Coming up. Thank you, Wenley. Okay, and then we've got Denise asking whether aquatic invasive species removal qualifies. Yes, we funded 2 significant water chestnut removal projects by New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission on the Blackstone River, one of which is still underway. I would say that we've gotten a lot of proposals for aquatic invasive species removal, and there's many that we haven't funded. So what I would say is that we're looking for something that has like a watershed impact and a public benefit. So in the case of the Blackstone work that we funded, that is bringing communities into water chestnut removal and, engaging communities on a level that they haven't been engaged before, and really trying to, frankly, I mean, they actually think they may be able to at some point wipe out water chestnut on the Blackstone River. So it's a very compelling project in that way, with a lot of community engagement and a big picture idea of where they're going with the project. When we get a proposal from a neighborhood association that wants to remove water chestnut or whatever at a private beach, that's something that, we wouldn't typically fund, because it doesn't have the broader benefit. It's not strategic, and it's not on a watershed scale. So I would just look at it that way.
Tom?
Yep.
I think Katie DeGoosh is on the call, and Katie might make a comment about there is a lakes management effort within DEM. So if you are a part of that organization, I think it's called Save the Lakes. That organization could be an applicant that would then allow multiple places where they deal with aquatic invasive species and actually get more bang for the buck.
Eric Andrade at Groundwork South Coast.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Margarita. And then here's a question from Harold Walker. Can you count unrecovered overhead beyond 15% as cost share? I believe the question is yes, and I think it's beyond 10%, but Margarita, could you address that? Or I think it's any amount that you forego in approved overhead. Margarita, could you address that?
Yes, right. If you have a negotiated indirect rate, so for example, URI typically has a very high indirect rate for its, proposals, but you can waive a portion of that to your own selection, your own choice about what amount you want to waive, and forego that indirect rate, that cost as part of your match. So it happens. I don't know how, if you remember when Narragansett, when Pete August was the chair of the Narragansett Management Committee, we had an agreement with URI that capped all of our indirect at 25%. I think that went away a long time ago, but we did have an actual agreement on that. But certainly any organization can forego part of its indirect rate.
If you don't have a negotiated indirect rate with the federal government, then you can, under our current rules, you can charge up to 10% indirect. And then so if you forego that could be used as match, I think. Is that correct, Margarita?
Yes.
Okay.
And there are, I think, all of the information that Tom provides when you do an agreement includes all of the elements that are covered under indirect. So what you are foregoing under that indirect, needs to be sort of highlighted, and then you can say, and we're not going to charge you for that. We're going to give our services to you for free.
So I don't see anything in the chat that we haven't addressed, I don't think. And I don't see any hands raised, but I want to give it a few more minutes here. Again, we're glad to answer any questions that you have or any comments, complaints, maybe. Oh, Tom Andrade, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing your last name correctly.
Yes, Andrade. Thank you, Tom, and thank you for all you do. I know you've done a lot of work here for the town of Dennis, and we appreciate that. A couple of projects that I just wanted to run past you that I'd like to get some feedback on. So we have one park project that has a pond in it. We're doing some water quality improvements. We're dredging the pond and we're making it bigger. We're trying to get the aquatic habitat to reestablish itself. We're going after an MVP grant on this and possibly a park grant. Would SNEP work well with both of those other funding sources if we tried to get a combination of those together?
I mean, I think so. I think, again, you'd have to make, an ecosystem connection if it's, purely a recreational project. I think it would be a stretch. But, it's a public park, show the public benefit. I do know that managed ponds on Cape Cod is just a huge issue now with cyanobacteria and that kind of thing. So if you can make a connection with that, all the better. I know APCC and Tim Passacarnis at Cape Cod Commission have both worked on that issue. So maybe touch base with them and see if you can make, ecosystem water quality connection and bring it in that way would be my suggestion.
Yep. Okay.
And certainly, Tom, you could also use MVP as your non-federal match since it's coming from the state.
Right. Yep.
Okay, good. And that's kind of answers that question. The second site, the town just purchased a large, it was an old Catholic church it's a parcel that's almost entirely paved, and we're looking to turn it back into a park. It's in an EJ community. There's a wetland in one of the corners, so we're hoping to restore it to a natural park with some passive recreation. Would something like that be a good fit? Absolutely.
Yeah, we funded a couple projects like that, including workout by Buzzard.
Yarmouth.
Was that, Maria?
The Yarmouth project in
the Yarmouth
Chase
project
Brook.
is a really good example. Yeah, where Yarmouth is developing a public park on the waterfront on an old motel site.
Yep, familiar with that.
Yeah, and then there's a Buzzards Bay Coalition project too, and I'm forgetting the name of the site, but it was actually another Catholic school, I think, at one time.
Yeah,
they tore down the school and are, pulling up pavement stuff.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much for all you do.
Oh, thank you. Any other questions?
Hey, Tom, this is Amelia from Ground.
Yeah, jump in, Amelia.
My kind of question is, if we are doing a project that is stormwater related, but also is like kind of park-like or at a school, can we also add like furniture or like equipment, like things that are not water related to the budget, or is that something that wouldn't be favorable?
I'm going to go out on a limb here, and then I'm going to ask Margarita to weigh in. So, if there's a public benefit to it, if it's part of sustainable communities, right?
Mm-hmm. Then
yes. Having said that, we manage a grant committee. It's a really great committee. It's it's pretty large. There's like 20 people who look at these grants and make the decisions about them. And they have often kind of pushed back on non-green aspects of projects. So, like for example, on the park project that Margarita was just talking about that Yarmouth did, they specified that the SNEP funds would not be used for like lighting and stuff like that, but that it would be used for actual plantings and that kind of thing. So my recommendation is to try to keep your budget as much as you can on the kind of green side. But having said that, we recognize that urban projects in particular, you a lot of times you can't restore an urban park without doing some paving or doing some lighting, that kind of thing. So, I think there's kind of a balancing act there. Margarita, do you want to add to that at all?
Well, I would agree with you. I do think that you could make a case if it's true that one of the things that you're trying to do is to implement like access for disability, for example. Like you have to have some kind of grading that and a paved path that allows, say, wheelchairs to go on it, that sort of thing. But I agree with Tom that in general, things like park furniture, really what we want to reserve the funding for is the actual environmental benefits that you might achieve. So, and to be sure, increasing the access, the public benefit, as Tom described it, is part of what we look for. And there are some discrete activities that might fall under that. So I would suggest that if you're thinking of doing something like that, that you put it in your letter of intent if you apply, and then we can get back to you about whether that seems reasonable or not.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. I actually have one more question if you don't.
Yeah, sure. And then we'll go to Michelle.
Which is like, I know in the past when we've applied for grants, for the SNEP grant, it's been some of the feedback we've gotten is that they want more of like a cohesive narrative, or for the project to be in like one place, or like doing a bunch of things in one location. But if we have just we've sort of generated this list of small projects that we could do sort of all over the place in urban communities, places that we normally work, Providence, Pawtucket, Central Falls, but it's not like one narrative thing other than, look, we generated this list and there's all these things that we can do, and we can do it all within the funding amount. Kind of just putting that out there, and if there's any feedback about that.
Again, we manage a committee, everybody kind of comes to it with their own perspective. I mean, I think with any grant application, not just our program, I would try to come up with a unifying theme or narrative. And I mean, I could certainly imagine ways of doing that and still working on multiple sites. I mean, your last project that you did, was in several watersheds, and those projects were pretty widely spread out through Providence and Pawtucket and maybe Central Falls too, I think. And that was a great project. You guys hit that one out of the park. So I think the case can be made, and maybe it's through the training component, maybe it's through the capacity building component, maybe it's through outreach that you do or a workshop that you do. But I definitely think there are ways to knit together multiple projects and present them as more than just a kind of shotgun approach to stormwater management.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Hey, Michelle.
Hey, Tom. So I have a couple of ideas.
Sure.
This is the first time I would be or considered putting in for the SWIG grant. So partners would be definitely public schools on the mainland and the municipality. So my first project has to do with phragmite removal and habitat restoration of salt marsh. And ultimately the goal would be that we can transfer into a mainland project that the school is also involved in. And then the second project was sand dune restoration. So those are kind of ideas. I don't know how that fits or what I should be thinking about for either?
Those are both, well within our priorities. The
Mhm.
thing I would say about both of them, um, with the Phragmites removal, and this applies not just to our program, but in general, we sit on other grant committees. We see a lot of Phragmites removal projects. Is I think you want kind of a long-term strategy for restoring the site. If it just looks like Phragmites treatment, and it really takes a lot of thought. I would bring in somebody with some expertise around this. Like, I know that Mass Audubon works out there, and Gene, forgetting his last name, he works at Allen's Pond with Wenley. Or I'm sure Wenley, would be good to contact. But I can email you Gene's Gene Albanese at Mass Audubon has a lot of expertise in this. So somebody like that, bring them in. Or there's folks at the Buzzards Bay Coalition who know a lot about this stuff. Rachel
Cuba.
Jacuba, yeah, right. Somebody like that, so that you're not just nuking the Phragmites, on a one-shot deal. You're actually looking towards true habitat
Remove-
restoration, and then it's
Right.
definitely something we would consider. The dune restoration, I would look at the. I know you guys have a lot of significant dunes out there, and with a lot of lobster traps in there. And
Yeah.
I would just look at it in the context of coastal resilience and, sea level rise and that sort of thing. And I mean, everybody realizes when you restore a dune, I mean, there's no guarantee that another Hurricane Sandy isn't going to come along next year. We recognize that, but you should recognize that too, right, in your application, and kind of address that possibility so that people aren't just like, well, they're just going to restore a dune and next year it's going to get washed out.
Right, right, right.
I would also suggest, Michelle, that for both of these, there's going to very likely be permitting requirements. And so you just need to incorporate the timeline and the cost of developing your permit. Usually a lot of our programs have gone to consultants and asked them to do the permits, but some of them are so complicated that there are so many multiple agencies that have to weigh in on it. So it's a good thing to include that. Like for Phragmites, I would also suggest it wasn't a SWIG, but it was a project that was funded under Rhode Island's 319 non-point source program, which did a big Phragmites project on Bucky Brook. And so they might have some advice, and a lot of it has to do with pesticide use and how you're certified to apply those pesticides and when and how. And then also the sand dunes, you're going to have to go to the Corps of Engineers. There's going to be a lot of looking at how you would restore the sand dunes. And sometimes a lot of it is planting beach grass or dune grass, and that should be fairly simple. But just make sure that you think about that as you put an application together, that this is not, as Tom said, one-shot deal. It's going to be a long-term process, especially, and that's where it might make sense to do the planning, particularly for the sand dunes. Do the planning, figure out what the permit requirements are, who's going to do what, and have that be your first part. And then once that's all in place and you've got security about your permits, then go to the next phase, which is actually doing the work.
The beauty is that the town already has a plan for the sand dune restoration from the Woods Hole group. So,
yeah,
we
you're
would
good to go then.
Right.
Yeah.
implementation.
And Wenley is off the call, but some of those planting activities and so forth are exempted, or they're,
Yeah.
may not require full on permits.
I
I'm not.
didn't know whether you were looking for like beach nourishment, like trucking sand in or anything like that. So it depends on your project for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if Woods Hole Group is involved, obviously they're very good. So, but if you need, if you want to shoot me an email, I can certainly send you some, folks to get in touch with who know a lot more about this stuff than I do.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank
Sure,
you.
no problem. Yeah. Any other questions? I don't see any other hands up. People can feel free to just jump right on, or let me look at the chat too. I don't see anything in the chat.
I think, Tom, one last, wearing my obnoxious federal hat here, is, all of you put this very well in the RFP and in the agreements, but, all the federal procurement requirements flow down to you as recipients. And so if you've got questions about that, we can help with it, but you have to do competitive procurements for the most part. There are things you can buy and not buy. There are currently words that you can't use, and I'm sure you've heard what those are. So be strategic about how you describe your project. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, one thing I would add to what Margarita said, which is, of course, well said, is that one thing a lot of people don't realize is that, yes, there are procurement requirements, but they're not that bad for most of the subcontracts that people have to do under our program. And the reason is that up to $10,000 under the rules that we're working under right now, up to $10,000 is a micro purchase, and up to 250,000 is a simplified acquisition threshold purchase. And you don't really get to full on, competition until you hit 250 for a subcontract. So it's really, as Margarita said, we can certainly advise people, and it's manageable. You got to be aware of it, but it's very manageable. Any other questions or comments? I don't see any. I don't see any in the chat. I don't see any hands up. So with that, I'll just thank everybody for their time. And, again, check out snepgrants.org, link to SWIG25, and good luck with your proposal. And if you have any problems, either with the online interface or any other questions, don't hesitate to shoot me an email and I'll get right back to you. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you, Tom.
So long. Bye.